Hi, welcome to my presentation. I'm Lou Matz, Professor of Philosophy and Chair of the Philosophy Department here at University of the Pacific in Stockton, California. We are located about 80 miles east of San Francisco in the Pacific Coast, so that's not a real way behind me. I wish it were, but we're close enough. And we're about 40 miles south of the capital of Sacramento for those who have not heard of Pacific or don't know our location. So thanks for making time to listen to my presentation. And I'm just going to go through PowerPoint slides by sharing the screen here. So my presentation is based on an article I had published last summer in the Journal of the Philosophy of Sport titled Turning Intercollegiate Athletics into a Performance Major Like Music. So if you're interested in more details about the curriculum or other kinds of arguments I made to defend the academic legitimacy of a competitive sport major, you might consult my article, and I'd be happy to send it to you. Pacific is a non-football Division I program in the West Coast Conference. We have about 4,000 undergraduates, and of those, around 325 are NCAA athletes. So my defense of a competitive sport major is based on the analogy to music performance and music performance majors. So that's a key analogy that Miles Brand, the former president of the NCAA, articulated in his article, The Role and Value of Intercollegiate Athletics, that came out in, I think, about 2006. And I extend his argument because Brand did not go so far as to defend how intercollegiate athletics contribute to a competitive sport major, but rather just the academic and educational value of intercollegiate athletics. So here are the ways in which competitive athletics are similar to, we might say, competitive music. That is music performance and sport performance. Both types of students have similar educational experiences. They have extensive year-round training at the university. They have elite skill before entering. Both athletes and musicians have played many years their instrument or their voice or a particular sport. There is sustained group contact in both types of activities. There are ensembles and chorales in music, as well as team sports, and even in intercollegiate athletics, some of the team sports might be a little more individually oriented, like golf or tennis, but nonetheless, there's a team atmosphere. There are public performances that both do. They are often expected to be representatives of the university. And both types of students have professional ambitions. Most of them have ambitions to, if they could, play at a professional level, but that few are able to attain. So that's the first way in which the majors are similar. The second would be that majors combine, we might say, theory and praxis, or theoretical and practical knowledge, or knowing that is the conceptual things, knowing things cognitively, and knowing how, that is the performance or application or praxis of those concepts. And then thirdly, both types of activities can develop under the right kinds of circumstances with the right kinds of coaching and program atmosphere, various kinds of character virtues like teamwork, discipline, perseverance, and intercultural interaction. I'm going to say more about those when I talk about the learning objectives of the program. So let's talk about the curriculum. This is, a curriculum that fits Pacific, but the curriculum will likely vary at different institutions based on the personnel you have and the expertise. So students to be eligible must participate for 3 years in intercollegiate or a specified club sport. And we're still coming up with a definition of the eligibility for club sport in working with our rec sports program. But some of the most important criteria would be, is there coaching, and is the coaching competent? Is there enough training, and are there enough competitions? So there would have to be stability in those club sport programs. Otherwise, a student could start this major and then the club sport not survive because of a lack of student interest. So we're looking at a model where the club sports really would be maybe a little more directed by coaches. They wouldn't be intercollegiate, they'd be club, but that would create stability and the capacity to recruit new students. There would be courses in exercise physiology and nutrition and metabolism. And the exercise phys course does have a kind of intro bio requirement. So those are 3 substantial science courses. We require a course in sport analytics, a statistics course focused on sports, a sports psychology course, a course in law and the policy of sport management course, global history of sport, philosophy of sport, that's a course I teach, a principles of coaching. Maybe there would be 2 courses that could be offered there, depending on how focused the program wants to be on how, you might say, how the extent of that focus on coaching. Then the students would do an internship. This is a signature component of the curriculum, which employers find to be perhaps the most important educational experience when they look at a graduating undergraduate students' transcript and background. So the idea is that the students could do an internship with their coach in the off season, learn about coaching and the business side of coaching and recruiting. Maybe it's with someone in the athletic department. Maybe it's with a local community sport organization. So there's options there. And then a capstone that would be integrative. That would be the operative term, an integrative capstone, that's where students would have some signature project that would combine something they've learned in the classroom with their sporting experience, and perhaps with an eye or focus on a project that would be desirable for an employer, a potential employer to see. So that's the curriculum. And an important part of the program would be to encourage, through advising, students to take a supplemental minor. This will improve job opportunities and also might just intrinsically be interesting to the student. So maybe they want to focus on strength and conditioning because maybe they want to do something in the fitness arena. Well, that extra 3 courses, that's all it would add because the curriculum is such that they already have exercise physiology, nutrition, metabolism, that strength and conditioning would open up more opportunities to do fitness kinds of jobs, or exercise physiology, or maybe they want to do something pre-professional, in which case they could do exercise and health science and maybe go into PT, for example. The sport or business management, if they were interested more in the business side of sport, they could just pick up a business minor or a sport management minor. If they're interested in the analytics side, we have a data analytics minor as well as a major here at Pacific. And we have pre-law. And typically, student would only have to take 3 more courses to complete any of these minors here. So, and they could double major. So that will improve the student's employability. The learning objectives would be shared between coaches and faculty. That is, not every one of these objectives coaches will address. They're not going to be doing written communication. They may not be focused on critical thinking in the way one would in philosophy or in chemistry, but nonetheless, coaches would focus on things like intercultural interaction or teamwork and leadership, maybe the most important one, but also ethical reasoning and action. I'll talk about these in more detail, because each of these learning objectives, and by the way, I forgot to mention competitive sport performance, which will be defined by the coach, and I'll say something here about. These objectives need to be defined in terms of accessible outcomes. So, for example, critical thinking, the outcomes would be things like understanding concepts and reasoning, or analyzing the logic of concepts and reasoning. Concepts and reasoning are important in competitive sport as well, not just in the classroom learning. Or asking probing questions. Teachers appreciate that. That shows critical thinking skill. Well, athletes, presumably in the best coach teams, are encouraged to ask questions. Well, you get a sense of a athlete's level of critical thinking by the kinds of questions they ask. And demonstrating independent judgment and creative thinking. So those things can be done in a philosophy essay, or they can be done on the field, on the court, on the pitch, with respect to how athletes, the kinds of judgments they make during competition. There are various intercultural interaction outcomes, things like exhibiting cultural self-awareness, displaying empathic understanding of others' backgrounds, and exhibiting respectful interaction with others. These are the outcomes that we've come up with here tentatively at Pacific. Other institutions might have different ones or articulate them in different ways. Teamwork and leadership outcomes are things like working cooperatively towards a common goal. That happens obviously in team sports, but also in the classroom if there's a group project, for example. Complying with course or team rules, influencing others ethically to achieve a common goal, probably more easily done in competitive sport than in traditional classes, but that could be done with group projects, for example, or co-ops or internships. And then demonstrating accountability for actions, both in the classroom and in competitive sport environment. Ethical reasoning, things like understanding ethical concepts and reasoning, analyzing the logic of concepts, those are going to be much more in the classroom. But if you look at the other ones, complying with course and sport rules, showing respect to classmates, teammates, and opponents, and exhibiting emotional self-control, that's very difficult in the context of competitive sport. A way to gauge and assess that there's more opportunities to do that in sport than there is in the traditional classroom. I will say, by the way, the ethical reasoning, the teamwork, intercultural, those are contemporary liberal arts skills and often seen as soft skills, even though they are often the most important in our roles as employees, employers, as citizens, as parents. And so sport provides an opportunity to develop those kinds of objectives. So with respect to the sports performance objective, say the sport is basketball, because this is going to vary, right? It might be whatever the student's sport is, that will be the competitive sport objective. And his or her coach will define the outcomes and the indicators. So I have a basketball background, and so here's an illustration of what some of these outcomes and indicators might be. Offensive skill in basketball, defensive skill, effort, and coachability. So with offensive skill, you might have things like how well does a player understand your offense in the motion, using and setting screens, quality of the ball movement, number of assists, amount of rebounding. It might be rebounding skill as well, shot selection. These might be some of the things that whatever the coaching staff values, they will define as the outcomes, these 4 outcomes, maybe there's more, and then the specific indicators. You can see with defense, things like on-ball containment, closing out the ball on passes, managing screens, help defense, steals, rebounding, whatever the things the coaching staff deems to be most important. And you have various effort indicators. You can see training hard, showing hustle, improvement ethic, or coachability, like willing to learn, doing what coaches ask, playing one's role, a positive attitude. So those are just some examples of the indicators in connection with specific outcomes. So let me talk about the program rationale. It's one thing in theory to make an argument that this competitive sport major has a strong theoretical foundation, but what about the case you would make to a department chair or a dean or an academic vice president or provost? Well, I've identified 5 different kinds of rationale. Competitive sport, like music performance, recognizes the academic value of this high level activity. In this context, it's athletics rather than music. It recognizes the academic value. in not just in practice and competitions, but in other things like strength and conditioning and travel, that there is a lot of educational opportunity there. And we looked at the various kinds of objectives uh, that like intercultural and teamwork and leadership and ethical action that apply there. The second is that being theoretical and practical, there's this opportunity to mutually reinforce the learning in each. So, you know, in the performance side, there will be things from the classes, from exercise phys or nutrition, from perhaps the philosophy of sport course or the history of sport course that provides some kind of perspective that can enhance performance. And likewise, the performance of sport can, I think, make much more meaningful the theoretical classroom learning. Um, in that regard, um, well, okay, so point three, the emotional and social intelligences that I talked about earlier, emotional self-control, teamwork, perseverance, and a cultural understanding, that this program can develop them in practice through the competitive sport activity in ways because of the sustained contact, in ways that really can't be done easily in traditional classroom learning. The major also provides an inherent motivation to want to do the theoretical learning. I think this is an important feature of the program, that take an activity that students care about, that they're invested in, and you know they will be more motivated to learn the theoretical dimensions and the more abstract theoretical dimensions of that activity than if they didn't do the activity. So they'll be more interested in learn philosophy and history, um, the political side of sports, as well as the scientific dimensions of exercise physiology, because there's a personal relevance. And then finally, I think this major does promote, will develop job opportunities. It's different than a sport pedagogy degree that is really focusing on K-12. This really fundamentally will prepare athletes, because of their playing experience and the curriculum, to step into coaching positions. And it's through that network, usually, of playing a college sport, that those are real opportunities compared to students who do sport pedagogy but don't play a sport. Or if they do sport pedagogy and play sport, they haven't had an educational experience that integrates those activities. And there's other positions in the sport industry, in fitness and conditioning, or the business side of sport. And as I said, if students do add one of these supplemental minors, that will improve their employability. I did a survey last fall of all of our intercollegiate athletes in 3 select club teams and asked them 4 questions. Would you have majored in competitive sport had we had the program? Do you anticipate to take a job in the future in the sports industry? And then the other 2 questions were open-ended. What do you find worthwhile about the competitive sport major? What concerns do you have? We had a 45% response rate, really impressive. 61 out of 152 students either agreed or strongly agreed that they would have majored in competitive sport. And of those 61, 39 were female. So there was clearly much more interest by our female athletes than male athletes in the program, although it was strong for both of them. Of those athletes that expressed that they would have majored, either they agreed or strongly agreed in competitive sport, here are the 4 majors that they currently are in. So these were the top, the highest number of students who would want to do the major come from health and exercise science, not a surprise, business, communication, sports management, and psychology, in that order. So not surprising, a lot of athletes are business majors or communication or in health and exercise science. So we would attract students from those, some of the students from those departments. 71 of the 155 claimed that they would seek work at some time in the sports industry. That's a pretty substantial number, since most of the students were not in health and exercise science. And the most worthwhile aspects of the major: excellent preparation for coaching and interesting curriculum content. I think that was a surprising finding, that students, even if there weren't job opportunities, we're drawn by the content of the major, and that will motivate them, I think, to do better than they would if they didn't find the curriculum interesting. And it's a better option than existing sports related majors. For the least worthwhile aspects, there was some concern about limited job opportunities. Is it really necessary to have this major become a coach? That it excludes non-athletes, and that it could further isolate athletes from non-athletes. I'll say a little more about that in these last two slides, because the last two slides are what I have gathered in the last over a year in widely talking about this potential major with academic stakeholders and the stakeholders in athletics. What are the main concerns? What are the obstacles here? Well, on the academic side, and that means either faculty or the dean or the academic vice president or provost or the vice provost of vice president of enrollment management, will this reduce the number of majors in some departments? That's one of the main concerns of faculty. This major will actually take away from their majors, a number of their majors. Is there enough differentiation from existing sport related majors for jobs? So at Pacific, we have human performance, which is a exercise physiology based major. Most of the department now it's focused on pre-professional training, whether it's PT or athletic training, occupational therapy. The sports management is now in the business school, and we recently eliminated our sport pedagogy program. So this really fills the sport pedagogy program, but in a very different way, because it's preparing athletes to coach at high competitive levels or take positions in the sport industry in the sports industry sector. Will the major be supported by parents? We know there's strong student demand. Will the parents be supportive? I would say that the fact that there's an internship in capstone, those are two of the five most important educational experiences that employers have identified in the country. And if you want to follow up with me, I could give you that data. It comes from the American Association of Colleges and Universities in their studies of employer attitudes towards the liberal arts and liberal learning, what they find most important. And will it create new enrollments? Some might say, well, this new major is just, Pacific's going to attract athletes. It's going to move them around to different majors and departments. Well, to some extent that's true, but I think we'll attract other kinds of students that wouldn't come here because of the major, both because of our sports as well as this particular program. And what we're doing is working with our club sport program. And this is where the new enrollments would come. Because at Pacific, as a private institution, to justify a new academic program, you have to make the case that you're going to bring in new students that wouldn't come otherwise, and that there are some job opportunities when they leave, and that there's value added in their educational experience. And so what we're doing is working with club sports to identify probably three club sports, hire full-time coaches, and they wouldn't be at a NCAA level, but hire coaches that would keep the program sustainable by doing recruitment. And they would be sports like that are popular in Northern California, where we principally draw our students. Sports like men and women's rugby or lacrosse, perhaps ultimate frisbee. So these things could be regionally different, but by building that up, we'll attract some of those students to competitive sport, as well as the other departments and schools at Pacific. On the athletic side, will the major be perceived as an easy major to maintain eligibility? Will it be perceived by those outside Pacific as being controlled by athletics? I could see those perceptions being formed, perhaps wrongly magnified by the media. But if you look at the curriculum, it's a very rigorous curriculum with sport analytics and biology courses and a lot of writing, very rigorous liberal arts curriculum. And the program's going to be administered on the academic side. There would be a faculty director. There's no involvement with athletics on this academic program, other than collaboration with some liaison with the coaches and the faculty to help maybe learn from each other about how best to assess student learning. Will the major further separate athletes from non-athletes? It's already this kind of cultural divide. On most campuses, it's true at Pacific. Athletes often live together. They have their own advising center. the sports facilities. They spend a lot of time there, but the major's only roughly maybe a third of all the students' units. They still have general education and a bunch of electives. So there's opportunity on the curriculum side, at least for students, athletes to mingle with non-athletes. We'll impose extra obligation on coaches. I would say at least at Pacific, not ones that aren't already implicitly done. So coaches here, as I understand from our athletic program, they do pre-season assessments of their players. And they do postseason assessment of their players. So, to go back to some of the possible outcomes, they could at the beginning of the season, evaluate how well they move the ball or set screens or find the open person for an assist or their shot selection or how well they play defense. And then they could do that at the end of the season. And so that would be kind of an easy pre-post assessment, create basic rubrics. Faculty or the faculty center for teaching at any institution could help coaches with that. And I think faculty have things to learn from coaches about how they can get the best out of their students. And then will coaches be impartial in grading? That's an issue to be worked out. Pacific students, athletes do take intercollegiate activity courses. They get 1 unit. Maybe those would be 2-unit courses because of the amount of contact time. But there would be ways to monitor coaches' fairness in grading. Maybe there'll be pass no pass courses, but even if they're graded, I think that the level of athletic skill coming in is going to be high, just as it is for music performance. So it's doubtful that any of the athletes are below like a C level with their skill. It might be more, have they improved or the other aspects like coachability and effort. So there are things still to talk about with the major in terms of the practical implementation. So if you have any questions about my presentation or anything about the competitive sport major, I'd love to hear from you and would appreciate any ideas you might have as I make my progress to try to gain enough traction to submit a new academic program proposal, which I hope to do within the next year if I get the green lights along the way. Be happy to talk with you by email or by Zoom or by phone. There's my email address, lmatz@pacific.edu. Thanks for taking time for my session, and I hope to hear from you.